Orlando traded All-Star center Nikola Vucevic and Al-Farouq Aminu to Chicago in return for Wendell Carter Jr., Otto Porter Jr., and 2 first-round picks. In the transaction, the Bulls received the center they needed to make a playoff push. Vucevic averages around 25 points and 12 boards, and he'll form an excellent pick-and-roll combination next to Zach LaVine. It's the first time in Nikola's prime that he hasn't been tasked with being the #1 scoring option, so that should improve his efficiency. If you're going to make a bold statement to the rest of the conference that you're a legitimate playoff team, then acquiring the 2-time All-Star Nikola was the perfect move to make. But the real reasons why the Bulls get an A in this trade, even though they gave up 2 first-round picks, are the facts that the organization hasn't made the playoffs since 2017, and more importantly, they can't afford to waste any more of Zach LaVine's prime. The Orlando Magic get a C+ in this deal, as usually you'd want to receive a top prospect in return for your All-Stars, and Wendell Carter Jr. simply isn't that guy. The 2 first-round picks Orlando's getting are going to be later in the draft, you can't forget, because the Bulls won't be in the lottery. The firepower Chicago's adding in the middle is legit, as Vucevic is one of the best stretch bigs in the NBA and won't have the same pressure on him like he had in Orlando. The Portland Trailblazers dealt Gary Trent Jr. and Rodney Hood in exchange for Norman Powell of the Toronto Raptors. The Blazers receive an A- in this deal, and the Raptors receive a B. Toronto spent years developing Norman Powell, and this year he was finally producing at an all-star caliber level. Powell's one of 5 players in this league averaging 19 points per game with an effective field goal percentage of over 60%. Zion, Jokic, LaVine, and Wood are the other players. Toronto could have moved their other impending free agent in Lowry, and I made a separate video on that a few weeks ago, but instead, Toronto traded their best player this year in another impending free agent in Norman Powell. Toronto does get a 22-year-old 15-point scorer and 40% three-point shooter in Gary Trent Jr., who can be a valuable shooting piece in the future, but this move seems like the Raptors are comfortable with being in the lottery and receiving a top pick in this year's draft. And you can't blame their front office for making a fade for Cade, because when you think about their front office, and it's led by Masai Ujiri, who's been there for nearly a decade, and the one thing he hasn't gotten to do is select a top prospect in the top 5 of a draft. Be patient, Raps fans, because while the rest of this season is going to be very rough, they may just select the future face of their franchise in 2021. Meanwhile, for the Blazers, who are currently the number 6 seed in the West, they're getting the ideal 3rd scoring option next to Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. Powell's championship experience is going to be valued big time in Portland, so I'm giving them an A- in this deal. Denver moved RJ Hampton, Gary Harris, and a first-round pick to receive Aaron Gordon from Orlando. The Nuggets lost an integral piece to their Western Conference Finals run last year in Jeremy Grant, and for most of this year, they've struggled on defense without their best wing stopper from the bubble. Also, Paul Millsap's age has begun to catch up with him. The roster is lacking in wing and front court defense, with JaMychal Green and Zeke Naji not being enough. The Nuggets traded for Aaron Gordon to add a new layer to their offense, and the dunk contest runner-up does exactly that. With Gordon's springy hops, lob catching, and playmaking, not only does this move fill the role of Jeremy Grant, but it also secures a future partner in the front court for Nikola Jokic as Millsap ages. That's why the Nuggets get a B+ in this deal. As for Orlando, they received a solid variation of assets for who they thought was their franchise cornerstone in Aaron Gordon. They're going to get back RJ Hampton, who has potential to be a future starter for the Magic. Gary Harris can potentially find his way back to being the 17-point-per-game scorer he was in his 4th year, and the Magic can finally go into the right direction with a complete reset rather than middling around the 8th seed every single year. I'll give the Magic a B for getting a decent return for Aaron Gordon. The Miami Heat's front office absolutely swindled the Houston Rockets, as Miami was somehow able to acquire Victor Oladipo for Avery Bradley, Kelly Olynyk, and a draft swap. Are you kidding me? This means that the Houston Rockets used Harden to get LeVert, LeVert to get Oladipo, and Oladipo to get Kelly Olynyk. Victor's a two-time All-Star who's a former Most Improved Player of the Year and an All-Defensive Team player who led the league in steals. This trade is by far the most lopsided one of them all, and one of the most lopsided trades we've seen in a very long time. The Miami Heat have solidified themselves as contenders in the East by getting an all-star guard in Victor Oladipo for two underwhelming players and a pick swap. There's no way you can go about this saying that Miami lost in any way, shape, or form. As for Houston, they gave away Oladipo for literally nothing. Kelly Olynyk and Avery Bradley are not game changers for the franchise, and Houston will have better draft picks than Miami in the future, so the pick swap is worthless. I'm giving the Miami Heat an A+ for an absolute finesse, and GM Raphael Stone and the Rockets get an F for one of the worst trades I've ever seen. Boston dealt Jeff Teague and 2 second-round picks to the Orlando Magic to receive another 20-point scorer in Evan Fournier. The Celtics have had a multitude of issues this season, ranging from inconsistent guard play to weak wing depth and underwhelming frontcourt play as well. Danny Ainge isn't known for making moves during trade season, so not many people expected the Celtics to capitalize with their traded player exception that they received from losing Gordon Hayward last year. Fournier provides consistent shooting for the Celtics team, and they were heavily lacking that for most of the year, with players like Marcus Smart and Daniel Tice being forced to take game-winning jump shots. On top of that, if Evan Fournier walks, the Celtics get another trade exception that they can use in 2022. So Ainge and the front office in Boston get an A for getting a great rotation player for almost nothing. For Orlando, this was probably the least possible value that they could have gotten for Evan Fournier. But something is better than nothing, and getting 2 second-rounders for a player who is likely going to walk doesn't hurt the Magic. Still though, Orlando gets a D for a lackluster return for their second leading scorer. LA moved the 3-time 6th Man of the Year in Lou Williams to the Atlanta Hawks in return for Rajon Rondo. The Los Angeles Clippers have needed a playmaker for their squad badly ever since they choked a 3-1 lead to the Denver Nuggets last postseason. They had no one to set up Kawhi or PG down the stretch in close games, as Patrick Beverley wasn't cutting it as a passer. Lou Williams was a big reason for that collapse, only putting up a measly 10 points per game on 35% shooting from the field and atrocious defense against the Nuggets. The man gets exposed with his size, and Williams has been even worse on defense this year, allowing anyone in front of him to score at will. This trade gets Lou off a team he was underperforming for, and the Clippers replace him with the playmaker they've always needed. Rondo has the championship experience to help the Clippers do something special this year. As for Atlanta, they lacked shot creation outside of their franchise star Trae Young, so getting a shooting guard who can create his own shot and some second-round picks on top of that is an excellent haul. Most importantly, Lou Williams gets to be back in Atlanta, eating wings at Magic City, only 5 minutes away from the Hawks Arena where he broke the bubble protocol for last summer. Overall, I think both teams won decently. I'm giving the Hawks and Clippers both Bs for fixing some of their roster issues. Before showing you the trade that could shift the NBA landscape the most, there were a ton of other minor deals that went down, so I'm going to put them on the screen right here. You can pause to read all of them. Now for which trade I think is most impactful. It's tough to declare one of these blockbuster trades I went in depth on as being the most meaningful, but I'd have to say the reigning Eastern Conference champion Miami Heat receiving a fierce third option in Victor Oladipo to pair next to Jimmy and Bam is the biggest trade of the 2021 deadline. Miami was already on fire, and now they get another leader, shot creator, and defender in Victor. But you could go either way and say that the trade of Gordon to Denver, Vooch to Chicago, Powell to Portland, or Fournier to Boston is...
I got broads in Atlanta, she took a me in the family.